So I'm Vice Chancellor at the University of Salford for Public Health and Social Responsibility, and I'm dealing with the College of Health and Social Care, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the university. My understanding is this is the first time that the Greater Manchester voluntary sector has come together, so it's a very important day. And obviously the report's got lots of very rich material in it, so I think it's very positive in these terms where we know that government funding cuts are having a major impact on the voluntary sector. And so it's very important in building the resilience of the sector to be able to still serve the community.
Just to introduce the study, the work was looking at, the title of the study is The State of the Voluntary Sector in Greater Manchester in 2012-13. Involved one of the largest surveys of the voluntary sector ever taken at a regional level in the UK. We had 1,400 responses. It brought together 8 partner organisations, covered 7 areas, Greater Manchester. And the key things were to produce some reliable data. I'm sure the context would not come as a surprise to many here. Peak funding was reached, was it in 2007, 2008? It's been a slow but increasing decline since. But interestingly, the sector, not just now, but over the last 15 years, has become much more prominent in money discourses around how we deliver welfare, how we deliver public services. But the downturn, economic downturn and public sector cuts have invariably had an impact. In many respects also, the sector is very rich and varied. And that has many of its origins in Greater Manchester. Co-ops, trade union movements, faith-based charity and also philanthropy have played an important part. And it's quite distinct, and that comes out in some of the trends when we've compared those to what the sector looks like elsewhere in Britain. To give some of the headline findings, our survey estimates that there are around 14,600 voluntary organisations in Greater Manchester. By far the majority have a budget of under, or an income of under £10,000 a year. Its total income, we estimated, is at £1 billion in 2011-12. We estimated, when we include and put a value on the contribution of volunteers, it's 1.7 billion. And this doesn't include its wider social value, the impact it has on people's lives. We estimated that 23,600 full-time equivalent paid staff, just over 1/3 volunteers, contribute an estimated 1.1 million volunteer hours. A quarter work in management roles, including trustee roles, 12% in admin, and the majority in delivering services.
I think it's a very good report that gives you a lot of numbers and a lot of understanding of things that you sort of knew, and it puts it down in black and white. And it shows what a big sector it is, what a massive and diverse variety of organisations exist. It gives some real guidelines as to the broader economic impact and the work that sector does. And I think it shows its the stresses and the pressures and the strains that it's under in a very timely and a very well-written way.
Well, I think it's a report that really brings home the scale of the sector in Greater Manchester, both the scale in terms of its size, obviously, but in terms of the variety of activities and the reach that it has. And I think too, and probably not at all surprisingly, the report really brings home the pressures that the sector is dealing with as need rises, but at the same time funding provision is really under pressure.
I'm speaking today on behalf of the support and development organisations in the 7 boroughs and Greater Manchester that actually commissioned this work. So that's the partners that have, between us all, delivered this project. So Salford CVS, Community Voluntary Action Tameside, GMCVO, Bolton CVS, Voluntary Action Oldham, Wigan and Lee CVS, Voluntary Community Action Trafford, and Manchester Community Central, for which MAC is the lead partner. Why did we want to do this work? Well, it's because of who we are as organisations. Our job in each of those boroughs is to support and nurture the third sector. So ultimately, our job is to encourage more people to get involved.
I think the most significant key fact was that something like a third of the organisations are spending more than they earn, and to understand that means they're essentially trading at a loss, or they're essentially dipping into reserves, which is highly unsustainable, and actually that's probably just the spearhead of where many others will follow. So probably nothing that we didn't know anyway, but to see it is a good ringing of the alarm bell to understand that for a large part sector, it can't go on as it has done now. It has done in the past, but it needs to do something differently.
I think that the really key bits of information were about the micro-organisations, the sheer number of organisations that are doing it for themselves already. So that was a key fact. And how do we tap into those? How do we mobilise those to continue to do what they're doing and then grow that sector even further? And then the other bit was about the value of volunteering. We all know that there's loads of volunteers in our areas doing great work, but I'm not sure it is recognised, even however many times we keep saying it, that actually it costs money and resources to support volunteers. And actually, in terms of if we want to grow the number of volunteers and the impact of what volunteers can do locally, we have to really strategically invest in that.
Well, I think what struck me was the £1 billion contribution and the number of employees. But obviously we've got a concern, haven't we, that with the changes in funding and the government funding cuts, that some voluntary organisations are already threatened.
I think it's the sense of having to cope right now, the sense that there is so much to be done and so many different pressures bearing down on the sector right now. And in many ways the sector has always said, well, we need more funding to do more, but I think there's a sense of urgency, a sense of concern that comes through from this particular report. There's no doubt, reading between the lines, the sector's very up for the challenge, but obviously it can't deliver services and support on thin air.
I think it is very significant how much the voluntary sector is contributing to the Greater Manchester economy, not just in terms of actual gross income, which as we know is concentrated in some of the larger groups, but actually the GVA and the huge added value that's brought, not just by volunteering, which is very significant indeed, but also things like upskilling people, enabling people to gain skills and confidence so that they actually enter into skilled employment.
The sector does face an uncertain future. Many respondents expressed concern about the future sustainability of their organisation, and I think that telling figure around a third seeing expenditure greater than income is a very telling one. Securing and generating sustainable funding was seen as a key challenge, and commonly so across many organisations. At the same time as there is a demand for services from not least the government's programme of welfare reform and low levels of economic growth.
And I think the key thing for us now as infrastructure organisations is to take that away and go, actually what's important to use at what point with our local public sector partners, etc., to evidence what the sector does. It provides a really solid foundation for that. I think one of the key things for me is actually 8 infrastructure organisations across Greater Manchester working together collaboratively to do this piece of work, and I think that provides some really solid foundations for future work together.
Since we want to identify where we think we've got to focus some work and in which bit of our sector we've got to focus that work.
And I guess in Oldham, the spaces around public service reform and how the voluntary sector has a part to play in that. If we genuinely feel that the sector, the community sector, is an alternative to public services, then how do we invest strategically in the right places to make that happen?
Well, I've got really 2 interests particularly that I'll be pursuing. First of all, in Parliament, as you will know and as people here at the conference today will know, the government is increasingly looking to have the voluntary sector more engaged directly in the delivery of public programmes, whether that's a work programme, new plans for probation, whatever it is. So I should be very interested to look at what the report is saying about the state of the sector, the resilience of the sector, the capacity of the sector, genuinely to be able to take advantage of and play a part in those government plans. I'm quite sceptical that the government is really putting in the underpinning support that the sector needs, and I don't think that the contracts that we've seen so far, for example, in the work programme, have been especially good for the sector. So I shall be looking very carefully at what the report tells me I need to highlight in terms of the support the sector needs. Locally, particularly because I've been a member of the Greater Manchester Poverty Commission, and we've seen a huge role for voluntary and community activity in helping to combat poverty in the city region. I'm very keen to make relationships with those who contributed to the report to talk about how collectively we can bear down on some of the really serious challenges we still have here of poverty and disadvantage. And I think one of the other things that comes out powerfully is that the sector needs to work more and more collectively.
We're actually launching our report next week at our voluntary and community sector forum, so that I think it's important that the groups find out everything first. And then it's going to the Stronger Communities Partnership that's over at the Town Hall in June. But in addition to that, what I'm really keen is I want to get it up to the Economic Partnership, because I don't think that the sheer wealth that the voluntary and community sector brings in Bolton is recognised in terms of the annual turnover, the number of staff, as well as the number of volunteers, and how that all fits into the local economy and makes us such a powerful force economically in Bolton, not not just a set of quiet groups.